Hey guys, Dr. Bodle here, and you might be wondering, is sugar something that you should never have if you have Hashimoto's? Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about what actually causes our immune system to react and be hypersensitive and therefore perpetuate symptoms of autoimmunity. We'll also discuss in what situations sugar can be a problem for us. And finally, we'll finish up talking about sugar alternatives and the best way that you can approach sugar. That way you can optimize your health. Once again, I'm Dr. Bodle, and if you like learning about the best natural strategies to improve your Hashimoto's and hypothyroid symptoms, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell for new videos every Thursday. So a simple but effective way to think about our immune system is sort of like a castle and the guards that protect that castle. With our castle, we need to have strong walls as part of the defense, but we also need to have competent guards who can patrol the castle and work the front gate. At the gate, the guards are there to vet whoever is coming to the castle. People who are friendly can be let in, and anyone who's perceived as a threat or an enemy can be blocked at that point. Our immune system also has a number of different barriers that work in concert with immune cells. Generally speaking, those barriers help to defend us from the outside world, while our immune cells handle most of the vetting process. However, whether it's the castle guards or your immune system, they don't like things that are strange or unfamiliar to them. It doesn't necessarily mean they're bad per se, but it does make them suspicious. When it comes to our body, the big thing that can cause our immune system to pause or maybe outright react is complex proteins. Proteins are a little bit unique when it comes to some of these foundational building blocks of life. Each unique amino acid has a different side chain, and these amino acids can be combined in different sequences, and eventually, these sequences and side chains are folded and twisted into complex shapes, which can then do some pretty amazing things in our physiology. I mean, what are neurotransmitters and hormones? They're complex protein shapes that interact with different types of receptors and confer very specific responses in our body. It's very cool and amazing at the same time. But if your immune system is being exposed to a complex protein that's coming from the external environment and it doesn't recognize what it does or what it's doing in your body, then it's immediately going to put your immune system on the defensive. The reason for that is because there's a strong possibility that this protein could be associated with a bacteria or virus that you've never experienced or come in contact with before. And the last thing your immune system wants to do is ignore that protein, allow it into the system where it can then potentially cause you harm. This is often why, when we're talking about food sensitivities, we're actually referring to these specific types of identifying proteins that can be found in different foods. So, what is gluten? Gluten is just a general term for some of the common proteins found in wheat, barley, and rye that can cause an immune response. One of the reasons why people think gluten can be the issue that it is because gluten is a very complex protein and it's hard for our body to break it down. So when that gluten compound arrives in our small intestine, our immune system thinks, if this was food, this should have been broken down into little amino acids. What's this giant protein doing here? And for people who are sensitive, our immune system might then mount a defense in an effort to protect us. The point that I'm trying to make here is most of the time, reactivity is driven by protein structures. And this type of complexity is not something that we see in the other macronutrients that we consume. Sugar can come in the form of monosaccharides like glucose and fructose. It can come in the form of disaccharides like sucrose and lactose. And finally, its largest form would be starch, which is a long repeating sequence of glucose molecules. But that's it. At its essence, it stays really simple. We either have one sugar by itself, two sugars combined together, that's our disaccharides, and even though starch can have thousands and thousands of glucose molecules in it, it's still just glucose packed together over and over again. There is no complexity, there's no shape, there's no folding, and that's why things like our neurotransmitters are made out of proteins, not out of sugars. This is why, in my opinion, sugar, in its basic form as a biological compound, is not something that is inherently immunogenic, meaning that it won't stimulate or cause our immune system to react in the same way that certain proteins would. Therefore, when it comes to Hashimoto's, although we certainly want to limit those foods that have proteins in them that have a higher likelihood of causing an immune reaction, when it comes to sugar, we don't need to have that same type of avoidance. You may have heard me say before that when it comes to food reactions, we need to make sure that we monitor the frequency of exposure. And the reason that I say that is because a lot of people think that moderation is the best way to go about our nutrition. It's okay to have cake, just as long as we don't have too much. But that mindset has to shift when it comes to autoimmunity. Even though some people aren't having a lot of the foods that they react to, because they're having those foods on a frequent enough basis, their immune system continues to be sensitive, and that limits their ability to heal. With sugar, we don't have to worry about this same type of reactivity and immune stimulation. The molecule is simply too simple. And in most cases, it's already in a digestible form that's easy for our body to process. Now, quick note here because some people might ask me about it. If you have a lactose issue or an inability to break down lactose due to a lack of the enzyme lactase, that was a lot to say, yes, that can cause digestive distress, but it's not an immune system response. But outside of people who have lactose intolerance, most sugars should not cause problems for your immune system and can be well tolerated by the gut. But you might be saying right now, Dr. Brad, that can't be right. I know sugar can be a problem for our health. But the reason why sugar can be a problem for people's health in general, but also people with Hashimoto's, isn't because of the exposure and the associated immune response. In this case, it's the amount that we're consuming that can cause problems for us. One glucose molecule showing up at our front gate, no problem. The guards are going to wave that glucose through every time. But if we start exposing our body to thousands and thousands of sugar molecules that are far in excess of what our body can tolerate and process, now we have a problem. Elevated amounts of glucose, blood sugar regulation, and insulin surges can lead to the excessive production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. When this occurs, this increased level of inflammation can impair the function of our immune system and contribute to pathological conditions. So the issue isn't so much the sugar itself, it's the amount that we're consuming and the overall load on the system. So one more time so that point is clear. When it comes to reactive food proteins that our body is sensitive to, we are better off avoiding those completely. But when it comes to sugar, which by itself isn't immunogenic, having some likely isn't a problem, but if we consume too much, that's when we're going to drive that inflammatory response, and that's when we're going to have immune system disruption. So if we want to moderate our sugar intake, it's at this point where people often ask me, sure, I want to avoid sugar and high fructose corn syrup, but what about some of those natural alternatives and sweeteners? And I do think there's a few things that we need to be aware of. Do I think things like honey and maple syrup are probably better for us than our standard refined white sugar? Yes, I do think there's a difference there. And research has shown that honey contains some low trace amounts of amino acids, minerals, and other nutrients, and could potentially have some antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. But at the same time, to some degree, sugar is sugar. And even though something like honey can have all these other trace nutrients in it, the bulk of the product is still fructose and glucose. And as a side note, it's always a little bit funny to me because some people will get up in arms about high fructose corn syrup. And don't get me wrong, I'm with you there. I share similar feelings. But when we look at the actual nutritional breakdown of high fructose corn syrup and honey, high fructose corn syrup is about 55% fructose and 45% glucose, whereas honey is about 40% fructose and 30% glucose. So again, I'm not saying that these are the same things, but if it's the ratios that bother you, both of these are higher fructose foods. But while I'm not a huge fan of high fructose corn syrup, I also don't think it's 100% totally evil either. But I do think the amount that it's used and the number of foods that it's found in is. So here's my point. Could you use something natural like honey or maple syrup to sweeten your foods from time to time? Yes, I think that would be totally fine, and I think it's likely better than some of those other options. However, it still is sugar, and it's not a get out of jail free card. So when it comes to managing our sugar intake, we shouldn't take processed sugar and swap it one for honey. We want to recognize that we're eating too much, change our habits, and use some of these natural options in small amounts when appropriate. When it comes to sweeteners, it's a little bit more of the same theme. I do think it's okay for people to have them in small amounts, and when we are having sweeteners, I usually try to steer people towards the more natural options such as stevia and monk fruit. Not saying they're perfect, but I have less of an issue with them than I do with some of the synthetic based ones. If you're using these sweeteners as a bridge from a less healthy diet to a more healthy diet, then I think that's a great approach. Or if there's something that can give you a sweet fix as you try to maintain your healthy diet, then that's another great opportunity to use them. But just like we don't want to use honey to replace vast amounts of sugar that we were eating before, we don't want to go crazy with these sweeteners either. Even though most of them don't have a direct impact on our blood sugar, they can contribute to some amount of blood sugar dysregulation in susceptible individuals. They might have some negative impacts on our gut microbiome, and it's possible that in some people they could negatively impact our satiety centers and impair our ability to recognize when we're full. So how do we approach this in the real world? Well, we want to limit our sugar intake, but we also want to understand that some sugar in our diet isn't going to be a problem for Hashimoto's. Buying some bacon that has sugar on the label because it's being used as part of the curing process is going to be much less of an issue than if we were to buy bacon that had wheat flour as one of the ingredients. Remember, it's the difference between exposure versus amount. Additionally, it can be helpful to avoid any foods that have added sugar. And we want to be mindful of foods that have naturally high levels of sugar and potentially over-consuming them. Things that come to mind include things like smoothies, dried tropical fruits, or even something like banana chips. And finally, using some natural sugar or sweeteners can be okay, but make sure you use them in limited amounts and you're not swapping them for sugar one-to-one. But let me know what you think in the comments. Is sugar something that you try to completely avoid, or is it something that you allow yourself to have from time to time? All of us are different, and I'd love to know what works best for you. If you like this video but you need more help, then I'd recommend reaching out and sending an email to contact@seattlethyroidhelp.com and getting more information about my online course. In my course, my goal is to help women with Hashimoto's who aren't getting help from their doctors, they want to make changes and they don't know where to start, go from feeling tired, frustrated, and exhausted from trying to figure things out on their own, to making nutritional, lifestyle, and supplemental choices with confidence. That way they can feel vibrant, strong, and love their lives again. The amount of information in the world of Hashimoto's can be stressful and overwhelming. And if you want a course that takes the guesswork out, gives you a plan of action, and provides you with live support every step of the way, then once again, I encourage you to reach out to me. Space is limited, so don't hesitate to get in touch. If you want to keep learning on your own, there's plenty of resources for that as well. You can check out some of the other videos and playlists right here on my YouTube channel. You can follow me on Instagram or Facebook for daily tips and strategies, or you can grab either one of my free downloads, which are listed in the description box below. But that's it for this one. I love you guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the support, and I hope that the information is continuing to serve you well. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. But my name is Dr. Bodle. I hope you have an excellent rest of your week, and I will see you in the next one.